Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso, and this morning I'll be speaking about a short discourse from the Buddha's teachings. So I'll start by paying homage to the Buddha, then I'll go through the discourse, and then if there's any questions, I'll take those at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Saṅghāṃ Namasāmi. So this morning we'll take a look at the Japadakalyāṇī Sutta, which is a very short discourse from the Samyutta Nikāya, chapter 47, sutta number 20. The title of this discourse, Japadakalyāṇī, here Bhante Suddhāso has this translated as the finest lady in the land. I found it kind of ironic when I looked at the post for this talk, because there was a picture of me and then the title says the finest lady of the land. And it's like, well, that's quite a compliment. I'll take it. But it's actually the name of the discourse. And since this is quite a short discourse, I'll just go ahead and read it out and then talk a little bit about it. Reading here from Bhante Suddhāso's translation from Sutta Central. I might slightly edit his translation as I go along. So the discourse begins. One time, the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sumbas, near the town of the Sumbas called Sedaka. There the Buddha addressed the monks. Monks, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Buddha said this, monks, suppose that on hearing the finest lady in the land, a large crowd would gather. And the finest lady in the land would dance and sing in a most thrilling way. On hearing the finest lady in the land is dancing and singing, the finest lady in the land is dancing and singing, an even larger crowd would gather. Then a person would come along who wants to live and doesn't want to die, who wants pleasure and recoils from pain. They would say to him, Sir, this is a bowl full to the brim with oil. You must carry it in between this large crowd and the finest lady in the land. And a man with a drawn sword will follow right behind you. Whenever you spill even a drop, he'll chop off your head right there. So this is setting the scene for us. So we have the finest lady in the land, as Bhante Suddhāso translated this. Singing and dancing, so something very interesting, something very pleasant, and there's a huge crowd of people who are watching this. So a bit like being at a rock concert, I suppose. So you're walking in between this enormous crowd of extremely excited people. There's something extremely interesting and pleasant to watch, to listen to, something distracting, enticing, to pay attention to. However, you have this bowl of oil, and if you lose your mindfulness for even a moment, then you might spill a bit of the oil, in which case the person following behind you will cut your head off. So that would be the end of the story right there. So the Buddha says, what do you think, monks? Would that person lose focus on that bowl and negligently get distracted outside? And the monks reply, certainly not, Bhante. No he tang, Bhante. Certainly not, Bhante. And the Buddha says, I've made up the simile to make a point, and this is what it means. A bowl of oil filled to the brim is a term for mindfulness of the body. So you should train like this. We will develop mindfulness of the body. We will cultivate it, make it our vehicle and our basis, keep it up, consolidate it, and properly implement it. This is how you should train. So this is a very, actually very well-known simile because it sums up the kind of attitude that we should be bringing to mindfulness practice, and in particular, mindfulness of the body. So you'll note, by the way, in the simile here, it's talking about a person who wants pleasure and wants to avoid pain. So normally when we want pleasure, what do? We seek entertainment, we seek enjoyment, we seek distraction, we seek company, we seek something pleasant to do. So in the case of this story, that would mean somebody wanting to watch the finest lady in the land dancing and singing, or maybe to interact with the crowd, or maybe watch what's going on. But actually, if you want pleasure, then the proper thing to do is to practice mindfulness of the body at all times. If you want to avoid pain, well, rather than distracting yourself with entertainment and pleasant things, instead, one should practice mindfulness of the body at all times. So again, the simile that the Buddha is giving here is, it seems like whenever we're inclined to get distracted or caught up in irrelevant things or insignificant things, whenever we're inclined to draw our attention away from mindfulness of the body, then we should remember. We should remember this simile. We should remember that ultimately, if we do that, we're just committing suicide, metaphorically speaking. There was an interesting story I heard many, many years ago. There was a layperson meditator, so a layperson who was practicing Buddhist meditation, and they had a Buddhist monk who was their point of reference, their instructor. And this person asked their teacher, they asked the monk, is it really necessary to meditate every single day? Isn't it okay if I skip a day every now and then? And the teacher said, no, it's not necessary to meditate every day. Yes, you can skip a day. You're killing yourself, but yes, you can skip a day. And so again, the teacher's point is like, yeah, of course, you don't have to do these practices if you don't want to. But it's just completely self-destructive. To let our mindfulness slip for even a moment is self-destructive. So the Buddha is giving a quite extreme case here of there literally being somebody following you with a sword, ready to kill you the moment you lose your mindfulness. But actually, he has a really serious point here, which is that what happens when we lose our mindfulness? What happens when we lose mindfulness of the body and we start letting ourselves be pulled around by our impulses, by our desires, by our aversion? What happens? Well, what happens is we're building up delusion. We're building up defilement. We're building up our mental corruptions that keep us trapped in samsara. We're pointing our mind away from awakening. And the other important thing here, again, to point out is that the Buddha here, he's not talking about going to the forest and sitting down and crossing your legs and focusing on your breathing in a nice, quiet, peaceful place. He's actually talking about somebody who's walking through a busy, chaotic, noisy environment filled with enticing distractions of all sorts. So this is actually pointing to the fact that our meditation practice is not restricted only to the times when we're doing formal meditation. But actually, it should be applied at all times, even in the most difficult and complicated and distracting situations. We should still be doing our best to maintain mindfulness of the body. So I don't have too much else to say on this discourse, so a quite straightforward discourse with a powerful and famous simile. So at this time, if there's any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take questions or comments. So hello to all the people joining in online. So hello to Greg, Karuna, John, Vivian, Manal, Usha, Gita, Kit, Vijita, Amaranta, Bhumika, Jayanta, and Sud. Welcome to all of you. And Sud has a question. So Sud asks, is the practice where you focus on one body part, such as the feet, during regular activities count as mindfulness of the body? Yes. Yes. So this is actually one relatively straightforward way of practicing mindfulness of the body, is as you go throughout your day, constantly focus on the sensation of your feet. And we spend a lot of our time standing and walking. And even when you're sitting in a chair, your feet are pressed against the floor. So the sensation of the feet is usually one of the strongest sensations in the body. It's actually very difficult to ignore once you start training yourself to pay attention to it. And yes, that is an aspect of mindfulness of the body. So I do highly recommend this practice to anyone who wants to strengthen their mindfulness practice. Mindfulness of feet. From the moment you wake up in the morning until the moment you fall asleep in the evening. Constantly practice mindfulness of feet. And this will give a strong foundation for maintaining mindfulness of the body. So of course, ideally, you're not only aware of your feet, you're aware of your entire body. But mindfulness of feet will give you a strong anchor that will keep you from getting out of touch with your body. And that's the only question online. So if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and conclude the session for the morning. So it looks like, oh, there's one more. So Sud says, also, there is such focus on mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of all sense experience in the teachings of the Buddha. But then in other places, he glorifies metta, and there might be more to this question still coming. But I'll go ahead and start responding to what you've written here. Yes, the Buddha did put tremendous importance on mindfulness of the body and the other three satipatthanas, so mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mental objects. Yes, he did put tremendous importance on mindfulness practice, especially mindfulness of the body. And yes, in other places, he also glorifies metta and other practices as well. And that's because there's many ways of training the mind. There's many ways of cultivating the wholesome mental qualities that point towards awakening. However, the practice of mindfulness of the body is something which is extremely powerful, extremely beneficial, and which is relevant and useful to most people most of the time. So it's the Swiss Army knife of Buddhist practice. So satipatthana, the practice of right mindfulness, is the Swiss Army knife of Buddhist meditation. It's something which is pretty much always helpful and always relevant. But there are, of course, many other ways of training the mind. And under certain circumstances, using other ways of training the mind might be more effective or more useful. So here's the rest of Sud's question. So in other places, he glorifies metta and brahmaviharas. Is it that we choose one of these meditations and this will lead to the end of the path? I feel just so distracted with all these meditations, I'm not sure which one to completely dedicate my efforts. Well, you don't need to pick only one to dedicate your efforts. In fact, I don't particularly recommend picking only one meditation and doing only that for the rest of your life. I think that's actually a phenomenally stupid way of practicing. Very ineffective. Much better is actually to practice multiple different methods, develop familiarity and proficiency with multiple different methods, and start to understand when it's better to use one particular method. Understanding when to use which method and when it's going to be most relevant and supportive for the development of your mind, the development of your practice. So, yeah, I mean, I do generally recommend mindfulness of the body as the basic foundation of meditation practice for most people. But it's also very important to also practice other techniques, such as the brahmaviharas, and use those when relevant, when helpful. You have a question?
If it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
For myself, I found mindfulness of the body cuts through those things that get in the way of metta arising and falling. So just having mindfulness of the body all the time, it allows metta to come out and metta to be there, especially when you need it.
Yeah.
Just that awareness. It's very powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. And Amaranta asks, mindfulness of the body, I do it too while I'm walking or doing other activities. Is it correct, or is it only correct to sit down? It is correct to do it at all times and all activities. Again, as in the simile that the Buddha gave of the person walking through the crowd while the performer is singing and dancing. Well, that's clearly not a story of somebody quietly doing sitting meditation. That's actually a case of doing an ordinary activity, in fact, in a quite chaotic and distracting environment. So yes, absolutely, you should be doing mindfulness of the body during all activities, no matter what it is. And that's the last question, so I think we'll go ahead and conclude it this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you this evening.